Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, even those who promoted the Spalding theory knew that it had some serious problems. In our next conversation, we'll talk about reactions to the theory once the manuscript was actually found. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. But there's actually a piece here which is signed by D.P. Hurlbut, Dr. Philastus Hurlbut. So it's a note to the copyist. On the other side of the paper in which the above is written in what seems to be the hand is the following. And this is really hard to read because he apparently uses a lot of abbreviations. But Itham Joiner, privilege to erect mill and privilege of, I don't know if that's water, WTR, I don't know what that is. Right has preference and he next to fix to take out water for himself to be at 1/4 expense of keeping dam in repair. If wishing to sell to G.V. Wright, I don't know, Governor Wright, I don't know what this is. Privilege being if I don't sell to another his works, but not privilege of water. I don't know. It's really hard to read this part. Joyner and W. Brigham agree to build a house for their use. I don't know. It's just, I can't even read it. But all I know is it's signed by Dr. Philastus Hurlbut. So this is clearly the document that he saw in 1833, 1833, and then gave to E.D. Howe, who published it in Mormonism Unveiled. So we've found the document. Of course, Hurlbut had to say, well, there must be another document. L.L. Rice was the guy who purchased the Painesville Telegraph assets, and he writes in here, it has been popularly and persistently claimed that the plan, subject matter, including prominent names and localities, history of the origin of Aboriginal races of America with their arts and sciences, civilizations, and customs were identical to this manuscript found and in the Book of Mormon. Rice continues, Mr. Spalding has been exalted by the opposers of the Latter-day Saints to be the very pinnacle of fame as a very learned, very moral, and very pious man. It is unfortunate that his true measure and worth in respect to his learning, his morals, and his piety is now furnished for us in this, quote, manuscript story. God judges men by their works, and it is wise for men to judge each other in this manner. And when we estimate Mr. Spalding by the content of his work as exhibited in this document, we must grade him down on a very low level, whether in respect to scholarship, mental powers, moral purity, or pious attainments and tendencies. So L.L. Rice doesn't hold back. This is a letter to Joseph Smith III. He continues, upon reflection since the writing of the foregoing, I am of the opinion that no one who reads this manuscript will give credit to the story that Solomon Spalding was in any wise the author of the Book of Mormon. It is likely that anyone who wrote so elegant a work as the Mormon Bible would spend his time getting up so shallow a story as this, which is at best but a feeble imitation of the other. I totally agree with L.L. Rice. But it's so strange to me. I can't believe how many people continue to try to revive this Spalding theory. Mark Hoffman tried to create a document to create a link between Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spalding. So this was in the 1980s. He created a land deed that was signed by both Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spalding. Of course, it was later ruled a forgery. Past owners of the document include Ken Sanders and Steve Mayfield. I interviewed Steve, and he talked about buying it from Ken Sanders for $4,000. So, I mean, the Hoffman forgeries are actually worth a lot of money still, and people who buy them know they're forgeries. That's the funny thing. So I've got a link there to my interview with Steve Mayfield where he talks about purposely buying this forgery because he thought it was cool, and he's since donated it to BYU. But that's not all. So, that kind of comes, I don't remember when Steve exactly bought it, but the forgery clearly was done in the 1980s. In 2008, there's what we refer to as the Jockers study. Stanford researchers Matthew Jockers, Daniela Witten, and Craig Criddle concluded that 57% of the Book of Mormon was authored by Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spalding. So this was published in Oxford, well-respected journal. I remember at the time reading it and reviewing it, and I had some questions about it. In fact, this is where the statistics come in. Jockers and company had used a new technique called NSC, Nearish Shrunken Centroid. Apparently, this is used by cancer researchers in rare cancers, and so the idea is you pick. Well, I'm not totally sure, but it sounds like, Robert mentioned before I worked in the College of Dermatology and worked on some brain injuries and things. When you're doing kind of a DNA type study, a lot of times you'll try to identify 4 or 5 or 6 possible genes that might be related to, say, breast cancer or psoriasis or something like that. And so it sounds like that's kind of the thing that they were doing. And so the idea was they took Sidney Rigdon. Well, they didn't take Joseph Smith, which I thought was really interesting, because they couldn't. The reason why they had a valid reason for not including Joseph Smith. It's hard to find documents that were actually written by Joseph Smith, and they didn't believe that the Book of Mormon was one of those. They were trying to prove that it was written by somebody else. So Sidney Rigdon, they picked 5 or 6 authors: Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris. I don't remember who they were. There's a link there at the bottom where it goes into more detail if you're interested in it. It's a very technical article. But one of the problems was the study was very flawed. So some BYU researchers used the same methodology that the Stanford researchers did, and they applied it to the Federalist Papers, which was clearly written by Alexander Hamilton. But they purposely excluded Alexander Hamilton, and they wanted to show the flaw in the study. And sure enough, Sidney Rigdon was the author of the Federalist Papers according to this method. So Bruce Scollier, Paul Fields, Matthew Roper, and Greg Snow said that they really, while it was really interesting what the Stanford researchers had done, they really needed to include a none of the above option. And so in 2011, they published a kind of rebuttal to the Stanford study. And they did such a great job. I know Craig Criddle was talking about, well, we're going to redo our study. It's never been redone. The BYU guys pretty much shut them up. So but I think both of those, there's links to both studies in that link there. But still, as late as 2019, Bryce Blankenagel, he does the Naked Mormonism podcast. He promoted the Spalding theory on Mormon stories. I've got a link there. If you go through the long, it's like a 4-hour interview. At the end, Bryce does talk about why scholars have problems with it. So I'll give him credit for that. But he's like, there's some good stuff here. And my comment is, every time people bring up the Spalding manuscript theory, I'm like, have you read Manuscript Found? And most people haven't. They're like, well, there's all these, because you can kind of see some superficial things, the storm and, the Indians, but I just think it's a joke. But anyway, I thought I would share Richard Van Wagner's conclusion. The weight of scholarly studies since Fawn Brody's seminal 1945 No Man Knows My History biography of Joseph Smith has all but eliminated the Spalding theory and Rigdon's complicity. The earliest Book of Mormon critic, Rigdon's former mentor Alexander Campbell, opined in 1831 that Joseph Smith, profoundly affected by the salvationist Christianity of 19th century Protestant America, was in fact the author of the work. So Alexander Campbell thinks it was all done by Joseph Smith. He doesn't buy anything about this. Thought I would share a few takeaways. If you go to that link, Spalding's work is just 162 pages, and it's in a pretty large font. I didn't even worry about that. The Book of Mormon is 588 pages. Even if Joseph Smith used the entire Spalding manuscript, he would have still had to come up with 426 more pages, which is 72%. So if you wanted to, even if you want to claim that Spalding was the author of the Book of Mormon, maybe at best a quarter to a third is all you could claim. Joseph Smith still had to come up with 3/4 of the information. Of course, Solomon Spalding is one of the many evidences that Americans had the ideas about the origin of Native Americans. I will admit there are some remarkable resemblances between Spalding and Smith's discovery of their manuscripts. When you talk about finding the gold plates and that sort of a thing, there are some remarkable resemblances there. Also, some big differences. We're using Latin versus Reformed Egyptian. So, and they're off by 1,000 years. We're talking about Constantine versus 600 BC. So it's about 1,000-year difference. Many proponents of the theory have never actually read manuscript found. They just find a nice article or website or whatever that says, hey, Solomon Spalding wrote the Book of Mormon. And so therefore they have to assume that there's a second manuscript, just like E.D. Howe and Dr. Phalassus Hurlbut said, in order for this theory to make any sense, you've got to have a lost manuscript. And then the conclusion, not a single mainstream scholar supports the Spalding theory. If you talk to Dan Vogel, you talk to anybody, I mean, they may have their own ideas, but there is literally not only nobody that supports it, but most scholars ridicule the theory. It's just, it's supported by amateurs and hobbyists who by default have to discredit Von Brody and Richard Van Wagener, who normally they would support their scholarship. So it's just a terrible theory. So I've got a list of sources here, and I'll share this with anybody who wants, and then I'll open it up for questions. I hope you enjoyed my introduction to the Spalding manuscript theory, and hopefully it's been thoroughly debunked, but I'm sure I'll get some people that still believe it. In our next conversation, I'm excited to continue our conversation, this time at the Firm Foundation, where I presented earlier this year. Now, I know a lot of Heartlanders really DNA is a big issue with the Book of Mormon. A lot of people are saying there's no DNA matches to Native Americans. And I know Rod has been a big proponent of the X2A. And one of the things I love about Rod is, and also Jonathan Neville, he wants people to have open ideas and open thoughts about these. And so he's allowing me, and I thank you, Rod, for giving a contrary point of view. And so I've got a little video. This is Simon Southerton. He's not a former believer. He doesn't believe anymore. But he takes issue with the X2A. And so I'm going to let, hopefully you guys will be able to hear this, Simon, from his own words, talk about the X2A DNA match here. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.